Have you ever stopped to think about how a scientific fact actually becomes a fact? We have this image of a super clean, objective process. But what if I told you that the statistical engine at the heart of it all has a pretty serious flaw? What if it's been systematically churning out results that are, well, just plain wrong? To really get a handle on this crack in the bedrock, we first have to understand the bedrock itself. And the absolute foundation of most scientific research is something called a research hypothesis. So what is a research hypothesis? Honestly, it's just an educated guess. It's a testable prediction. Think of it like a researcher placing a very specific bet, saying, I bet students who take classes online study fewer hours per week than students in traditional classrooms. That one single bet becomes the North Star for the entire experiment. Now, every one of these scientific bets has to be set up in a very specific way, like a title fight. In one corner, you've got the alternative hypothesis. That's the researcher's actual idea, their theory about online classes. But to test it, they have to go up against its opposite, the null hypothesis. The null is the default champion, the ultimate skeptic. It's the voice that says, nope, nothing is happening here, no difference, no effect. Prove me wrong. A really great way to think about the null hypothesis is like the principle of presumed innocent in a courtroom. It just assumes there's nothing going on. The entire point of the experiment, then, is to gather a mountain of evidence, the data, to reject that presumption of innocence and prove beyond a reasonable statistical doubt that the alternative idea is guilty of being true. When a researcher places that bet, they have a choice to make. They can make a directional hypothesis where they predict a very specific outcome, something like students who study longer will score higher on tests. Or they can be a bit more cautious and go with a non-directional hypothesis. That's just saying, I think there's a difference in test scores between these two groups, but without saying who will do better. And that choice directly determines the kind of statistical test they use. That specific directional bet, that uses a one-tailed test because you're literally only looking for an effect in one direction. But that more general, non-directional bet, that uses a two-tailed test because you're keeping your options open for an effect in either direction, higher or lower. So how do they decide if the evidence is strong enough to win the case? They set a bar called a significance level, or alpha. And that bar is almost always set at 5%, or 0.05. In that two-tailed test we just mentioned, that 5% gets split in half. This means they're looking for a result so unusual that it would only happen in the outer 2.5% on either side of the curve if the null hypothesis of nothing's going on were actually true. So there you have it. The null hypothesis, the p-value, that 5% cutoff, this whole system is called null hypothesis significance testing, or NHST. And for decades, it's been the cornerstone of research. Seems pretty logical, doesn't it? Well, not to everyone. I mean, look at this quote. This isn't from a few years ago. This is from 1972. Some experts have been sounding the alarm for a very, very long time. You know that trouble the quote warned us about? Well, we're living in it. It's a huge part of what's now called the replication crisis. What's happening is that study after study, studies hailed as major breakthroughs and published in top journals, are failing to be reproduced. Other scientists try the exact same experiment, and the amazing finding just vanishes. And the scale of this problem is just mind-boggling. Some analyses suggest that in certain fields like psychology and biomedical science, more than half of all the published findings are probably false positives. So that bedrock we talked about, it isn't just cracked, it might actually be crumbling. And it all boils down to a massive misunderstanding of what our statistics are really telling us. Okay, this is the absolute core of the problem, the p-value. Most people, and heck, even a lot of scientists, think a p-value of 0.05 means there's only a 5% chance their result is a fluke. This is completely, totally wrong. A p-value only tells you the probability of seeing the data you collected if the null hypothesis of nothing is happening is true. It never, ever tells you the probability that your own hypothesis is true. So if the p-value doesn't tell us the chance of being wrong, what does? Well, that number is called the false report probability, or FRP. This is the number we should actually care about. It's the real probability that a significant finding is just a false alarm. And here's the shocker. In realistic situations, a study with that golden p-value of 0.05 can easily have a false report probability of 30%, 50%, or even higher. So what's pushing this number so high? It's basically three main things. First, how plausible was the original idea? If it was a real long shot to begin with, a significant result is more likely to be a fluke. Second is publication bias. Journals love to publish exciting, positive results and tend to bury the negative ones. And third, and this one is critical, is low statistical power. Statistical power is just the ability of a study to actually detect a real effect if it exists. Think of it like the zoom on a camera, and it's mostly about sample size. A study with low power, meaning too few participants, is way more likely to give you a false positive. Even if you get a significant p-value, an underpowered study is kind of like a biased coin toss. It's likely to give you a misleading answer. Now, I know this all sounds pretty bleak, right? Like the whole system is broken. But the story doesn't end here, because the most powerful thing about the scientific method is that it is designed to be self-correcting. The very fact that we're all talking about a replication crisis is a sign that the immune system of science is kicking in. The community is very aware of this, and they're actively working to fix it. So how are they fixing it? Well, researchers are pushing for some major reforms. Things like pre-registering their studies so they can't change the hypothesis halfway through, requiring much larger sample sizes to get that statistical power up, focusing on the size of an effect, not just a simple yes or no answer, and crucially, publishing all the results, even the so-called failures. So the next time you see a big headline about some wild new scientific finding, just remember the messy human process behind it. Understanding these flaws shouldn't make us stop trusting science. It should help us see it for what it truly is. Not a book of unchanging facts, but a dynamic and ultimately self-correcting process of getting closer to the truth. And right now, we might just be lucky enough to be watching that correction happen in real time.